Hey everyone, so I'm Rob. I'm a developer, front-end developer, vehicle like Margot said, and this talk is going to be about portals, specifically with React and Vue. But before we jump into the details of what portals are, I'm just going to give a high-level overview of what React is and what Vue is and what that means. So I'm sure you've all heard of portals, so this will all make a lot more sense when we talk about portals in terms of Vue and React, but the concept is the same. There's a whole video game based off portals. There's Narnia, it's a closet. Basically goes to a different world. That's like a portal. You got your classic Rick and Morty portal. And wormholes are like portals too, except they're interesting because there's a theoretical basis to that, so they're cool to think about. But that's portals. I'm sure you've all heard of it, so once we get into it, it should be a little more straightforward. Now I'm going to talk about React and Vue. So who here has used React and Vue before and sort of understand what it's about? So about half the people. So if you've already used it, this part might be a little bit basic for you, but for everyone else, hopefully it's a good overview. So React and Vue are both component-based libraries. So everything in there is organized into a component. And a component is a reusable, modular sort of block of code. And I do this diagram here to sort of represent what that's like. So components can be composed. You can have a parent component. A parent component can contain child components. And components have a well-defined API. And this is true for both React and Vue. They're very similar in this sense. They're both component-based libraries. As opposed to something like jQuery, where you might build your own sort of framework around the basic building blocks. React and Vue give you components as the basic building blocks. So the basic interface between components are props and events. Data always flows in one direction when you're dealing with components. Props go in, so when you set an attribute on a component, it appears to the component as a proper property, and components fire events up. So there's always this one-way communication, props down, events up. And this is just sort of a sketch to show you what that's like. Does that make sense? Cool. Next slide. So I got carried away with my iPad and my Apple Pencil. I thought I might put it to use, so I do some sketches to sort of drive home some points. So these are just two components, and it sort of visualizes how they might communicate with each other. So you pass around props and you emit events, and if there's a component that's listening to an event, it can respond to it. So that's the sort of dynamic that occurs between components in React and Vue. And that's the basics of React and Vue. It's components, and if you understand that, it's pretty easy to get started with the rest of it. And I'm going to go into more of the differences between React and Vue. They're mostly the same, but there are a few differences. And with this picture, I'm just trying to show how component, everything is contained within a component. So you don't really follow a sort of MVC pattern. You have a component that has some internal state, some props, and it renders some HTML. And that's the same, again, in React and Vue. So the view is a function of props and state. So when state changes, and state is the internal sort of data that a component relies on and uses, and props come from the outside, like I said before. And so these two things make up a component, or what a component renders. Excuse me. So this here is an example of a component in React. And there's two ways to build components in React and Vue, in React. You can have a class, you can use an ES6 class like this, or you can use a function. I'm just going to stick with the classical class example. And there's two major ways that Vue and React differ, and I think that's in terms of how they handle the data inside the component. So here you have some state. This is the internal state I was talking about. This is your entire component. So in React, state is immutable. So this is, who here is familiar with the term immutable? Immutable data. Got some hands, so about like 1/4. But basically immutable means you can't change it. So when you set some state on a component, like this count, and you set to 1, you're never going to call state.count equals, or state.count plus 1, because that'll directly change what this state is. So in React, state is immutable and you never change it, but use a special function called setState to update the internal component state. And I'll tell you later how this differs in Vue. In Vue, data isn't immutable. You interact with it like you would any other regular JavaScript object. And so that's one reason why some people might like Vue. It's a little simpler to grasp in that sense. You don't have to deal with this immutability. That might be hard to understand at first. But yeah, that's one difference, how components handle state. And I hope this kind of makes more sense and ties into the sort of sketches that I showed before. You have your class component. This is your internal state, and it renders something. And this is going to be very similar to how it does it in Vue as well. You have some stuff, and you can see that what gets rendered, this count here. The Vue output is a function of the state. And if we had some props in here, we can throw those in here as well. And basically, a new view would be rendered when the state and props changes. And any questions about what's going on here? Cool. Oh, is there a question? Vue and React differ in another major way as well. So the first one I said was how they handle data. React has this idea of immutability and using set state to change data, whereas Vue just treats data as more like a plain object that you can just mutate and modify. And the other big thing I find is sort of the community and tooling around these two libraries. In React, you have a big focus on using JSX. You can use React without JSX, but documentation and the community sort of gravitate around this syntax. And so if you start off with Vue and you go to React, or you start off with React and you go to Vue, then you might, and you really like JSX, then that's one of the things you might use to decide if you want to keep doing Vue or stick with React. So JSX is one of those big things that people sort of split on when it comes to the two frameworks. And if I go back one slide, you can see the rendered output here is JSX. And so JSX is just...
Sorry, I missed that. Can you go back?
Yep. You got a question about this?
No. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, if anyone has any questions, feel free to shout out. So JSX is just syntactic sugar basically around functions. It lets you write this, and what it creates is this. And when someone says that you can use React without JSX, it's just writing the functions directly. But this is definitely a lot nicer than writing this. But if you write a component like this, and your view looks like this, then once it goes through the build step, all those DOM nodes, all these things will be converted into this basically. And here's the exact same component, but in Vue. And you can see there's a lot of parallels. So instead of a render function, you have this template, and you can also put it into a template string. But the template in Vue is basically like the render function in React. You can define your component, and then you have some JavaScript here that lets you set the component state, internal data, and some other things like methods and anything else you want accessible in your component. And you can see here that in Vue, the state is just a data function that returns a plain object, and there's no concept of immutability here unless you want to add in immutability. But in Vue, you deal with the state like it's a regular object. So you don't need to call set state to update the state. You can just call count plus plus or count plus equals 1, and that'll be reflected in the Vue. So when the data changes, the Vue gets updated. Like in React and Vue, in Vue and React, the generated output is a function of the state and props. So if I go back twice, you can see just another comparison of how it looks. So this is Vue, and this is the same thing. Oh, sorry, I keep mixing up Vue and React. This is React, and this is the same thing in Vue. And in Vue, this basically just gets turned into a render function. But this is not JSX, it's HTML. But when Vue goes through this, it'll create a render function and handle things like this. So in Vue, you have the template directives and the special syntax like this. It's all about HTML, but it's a way to let you add more functionality to a Vue template. And you can see Vue uses double curly.
Between template and script here?
Template and script. So this is what's referred to as a Vue like single file component. So it's just a way to help organize it. So in a regular HTML document, you have your script tags at the bottom where you put your JavaScript. And this is sort of mimicking that structure and keeping your JavaScript separate from your Vue. So this is just an organizational thing. You put template here, and this is a valid HTML, and then any script to control the internal state or any actions you want to perform as part of this component, you can put in your script. So this contains JavaScript, this contains HTML. And in Vue, in React, this is all just in a regular JavaScript file. So this is all just a JavaScript class, and when you return is an HTML, like in Vue. This is also just JavaScript. So in React, you're always working with JavaScript. So even if you see this, it's going to be transpiled to regular JavaScript. Whereas in Vue, this actually all gets split up, and this code will be in a file called like app.vue. It won't be a JavaScript. It's not just JavaScript or just HTML. You can see it's all separated there.
So actually that script, what it's doing? It is invoking the template somewhere?
So it doesn't. You don't invoke the template directly. What you do is, and you'll see an example of this once I get the example of portals. But that's sort of the cool part about these frameworks is you build up these components and then you pass in your single entry point, and then React or Vue will go through and take these and compile them for you and generate your complete app at the end. So you don't have to manually call render or manually do any compilation here. This will be handled for you by Vue.
That data is, can you pass some parameters here?
So you can pass parameters to the component through props, but this is, you define this in the component once and you can modify it later. Is that, I'm not sure I answered your question properly. Is that what you mean?
Because for me it looks like some boilerplate there. Yeah, export default, so that means any script should have that, and then if you want to add more, how you customize it, yeah?
Oh, so yeah, every Vue component will look like this. You'll always export a default, which will be an object that represents the different options you can pass to a Vue component. If you want to customize it, you can add different properties. So right now I've only defined the data, which is what you can access in the component. But you can add methods here to perform any custom actions, and you can hook into the different sort of lifecycle parts of the component. So when Vue creates this app, it'll go through different phases of initializing the variables and stuff, and then actually mounting it. So you can hook into those to get some more custom functionality out of it if you want to make an API call, say right after this component mounts. But that'll all be defined inside this sort of options object that Vue will take and then allow you to add interactive view to this component here. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay. Well, you can always shout out more questions, and if something doesn't make sense to anyone else too, I'll try my best to explain it. And we can always circle back and discuss anything that wasn't clear after.
So I'm just starting with Vue, and
Yep.
that seems to be the default starting point
Yeah.
for Vue.
Yeah. You usually have a single component, and then if you want to, generally with React and Vue, you'd have like one entry point, and if you want to build a bigger app, you'd have other custom components in here. So right now I'm just using plain HTML elements, but this button could be like my custom button, or it could be like a page, or you have, instead of like a div in H1, it'd be like component 1, component 2, component 3, and those components would be like this, but defined in a different file.
So each component you put it in the template.
Yeah, so you'd have one entry point, and then all your components will go into this. Basically, it's a composition of components. And it's kind of hard to like reason about that from this small example, but I'm gonna, near the end, I'm gonna pull up a couple examples of a couple of examples of using portals in both these libraries, and it'll make a little more sense, hopefully. But this is just like a high-level overview of how it kind of works. And yeah, that's actually really the main differences between React and Vue is React uses immutable data, and Vue works around just regular objects and sort of the communities around them. In Vue, you use templates and regular HTML. In React, you use JSX. And there's a few minor things. If you start using Vue or start using React, even though they're very similar, there's minor things that will be different as you work through them. Like in React, it's common to just always pass down props. So if you're listening to a button click, in Vue, it's really common to listen to the onClick event, and then do some and handle the event up here. In React, it's common just to pass down the event handler and call that directly when you click a button in the component.
So any reason why Vue doesn't use immutable data?
I guess it's just the architecture they went with. It seems a little more simpler. That's one of the I guess selling points for Vue. It makes it easier to reason about your data when you don't have to think about immutability. In React, you have to call set state. In Vue, you just treat it like a regular object, and a lot of people are familiar with that. So if you want to change, the value of count here, you can just call count plus plus, and it works how you would expect it. Whereas in React, you have to call this, which looks a lot more scary. You gotta call set state, which takes the current state, and then you return a new state. So you're never modifying the current state, you're just replacing it with a new state. And that's what makes it immutable. You gotta take the old state, add one to it, and that'll be your new state. And it takes a little bit to wrap your head around, whereas in Vue, it's a little easier to jump in because you're working with this, and it's a little easier to reason about. You just call count plus plus, and you know, increment the count, and the updated count will be rendered here.
But immutability has advantages, yeah? I mean, it's not for, we have some advantages in code safety and stuff, yeah, because if you cannot change a variable and have to call a function on it, you know what you are doing. So it is easy to make a mistake in Vue, in my opinion. So what's their selling point then?
It is, you can use immutability in React if you want, or sorry, in Vue. But I guess, yeah, there's trade-offs. It's harder to build your app and structure it in a more functional, I guess, way. And yeah, it's just, the only selling point is it's easier to reason about. You don't have to deal with set state and then the edge cases it might introduce. But yeah, I agree. Using immutable state makes certain things a lot easier, especially when you need to do certain computations where you compare the various states, or where you need to revert the current state to the previous state. It makes it easy.
You can also do immutable state view.
Yeah. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can set up Vuex. So you can set up Vuex to use immutable state as well. And then instead of directly mutating the state, you just create a copy and then set that as the value.
And then you're working with larger code base.
Yep.
It's a lot easier and cleaner to go to the view. In my experience, that's the React.
Yeah. It's easier. You're saying it's easier in Vue to go through the code?
Easier in Vue to go to component because everything related to component is in one file.
Yep.
So you have that data props and you see all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can have similar steps in both React and Vue. In React, you can have everything in one place, and you can use immutability in React and Vue. So it all comes down to the minor details, I think. But yeah, those are good points. And if you start working with React and Vue, you'll find it's very similar. You can do whatever you can do in React, you can basically do in Vue, and whatever you can do in Vue, you can pretty much do in React as well. And then, are there any more questions about these slides or concepts?
So both React and Vue are like rendering engines, yeah? Because I was reading people are preferring Vue lately to React. So it is just the fact that we don't have immutability and it's easy to apprehend the code, or
There's a lot of reasons why people might pick up Vue as opposed to React. But yeah, they both have their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, if you're working with a group of developers and you have to choose between the two, I would just choose whichever one people have the most experience with or are most familiar with, because you can do the same things in both. And in terms of immutability, like this gentleman said, you can set up immutable data structures in Vue as well. You don't need to follow just what they have set up with their data property there. You can bring in immutability and build it in a way similar to how React handles state if you need the advantage of immutability and want to write things in a more functional way. Yeah.
When you see like comparing Vue to React, do you mean like compare Vue to component? What kind of like confused?
Vue.
Like you said, like the Vue compared to the React. Something.
Oh, okay. So when I say you're talking about like, so there's Vue.js and then React.js, and are you saying like the rendered Vue versus like React, or are you saying how like, are you asking about how the two render?
So I think he's asking
Oh,
about
okay.
Vuex.
Vuex is a way to sort of handle this data externally from the component. It's not something I'm going to go over in this presentation, but it's a way to allow you to easily share data between components. So like generally you'd have your data living in here, and if you want this component to have it, you'd pass it down as a prop. But if you want, say these components are nested more deeply in the component tree, and you want to pass some data from up here and share it with all your child components, then that's a case where if you're using Vue, you might bring in a library called Vuex, and if you're using React, you'd bring in something like Redux. And these are just global state management libraries that you can use to pull up this sort of state away from outside of the component into like a global component that you can share with all the other components. So it's just a different way to manage state. That makes sense?
Yep. Thank you.
So yeah, you guys ready to move on to a little bit of portals? Let's do that. So, yeah. This is basically a portal in programming. You'll define it as a component in one place, and then you can basically put whatever you want inside the portal. Here I have a header element h1. This component will be defined in some component in your app, and then you can set the other end of the portal anywhere else in the app, and then whatever you pass in the portal here will appear where you set the portal target. And that's basically it. That's basically how portals work. Here's another sketch of how this might be set up in your application. You have your HTML, and then you define a portal target in one place, and then you set up you have a component here. As you can see, they're totally different spots on the page. They're not nested inside of each other, and so you can set up your portal in here, and whatever you render here will appear up here. So it's useful for things like modals. If you have a component where you want some sort of prompt to show up, and you want to cover everything on the page, but it's difficult because maybe this component has like an overflow or some weird positioning in z-index that makes it hard to have the modal always appear above everything else. Then a modal is super useful. You can just define, that portal is super useful. You can define your portal here, and then we'll render up here above everything else. And next slide will just be basically a list of like what modals are useful for. Like what portals are useful for. Modals, pop-ups, dialogues, and tooltips. So basically anything you want to sort of break out from the component and render wherever you want, but still be part of the component. So like you can create a modal that's its own separate component above everything else, but it won't be linked to any component. So a portal allows you to do that. It allows you to keep things defined in this component structure, which is what React and Vue are really good at, building apps from components, and allows you to create things like modals, which require you to like sort of break out from that component structure and render something above all the other components. And so these are all my slides, and I have a couple examples of using portals in both React and Vue. Oh, it's super tiny. Okay, so testing things, portals. Okay. There we go. We'll make this bigger. So what do we have here? All this. All right, so I have two examples here. One is in React and one is in Vue. So we'll just get the React one first. And I'm not doing any live coding right now. I created both of these apps before. I created the React app using Create React app, and the Vue component, or the Vue app, I created the Vue app using the Vue CLI. So these are two pretty useful tools to get an app up and running pretty quick. And you can see, not sure who asked this before, but you can see like this is the entry point for like a React component. It's going to be similar in Vue as well. You basically have one entry point. React DOM handles the rendering of the various components. So we'll take your JavaScript functions and create and generate the HTML from those. And you basically select where you want your component to render, and then you pass in your app, and then it'll all get rendered. So you can see here we have this ID of root. This is where our app is going to go. And this is our index.html. You can see we're setting the target here for our app to the root, the element with the ID of root, and we're passing an app. And yeah, here's our app. So I'm just going to run this just so you guys can see what it's doing. Start. Okay, so this is the example I set up, and you'll see how this works, but in the code, I set up a component here with a portal, and I put a div in here, and it ends up being rendered at the top there. Something else? So here's my app. This is my portal target. And I just kept the original name that was set up for me here called Hello World. So I'll open up Hello World. You have a React component here, and you can see I have this H1 Hello World, which gets rendered right here. Okay, in the VS Code. So we have Hello World, and then right below it you have this portal, and I'm importing it from this portal thing. So one thing you'll notice with React versus Vue is in React it's a little more like lower level. You have to build certain things manually. In Vue you'll see that there's already a standard sort of portal library that you can use. Whereas in React, portals are built in, but you have to do a little more work to make it behave in the way that you're seeing here. So I have this portal component. I put this content inside of it, and just by looking at this, you'd kind of expect like, oh, there's this H1, and then right below it, this div is going to render. And this Hello World component is placed right here. So this will be replaced. This Hello World here will be replaced by what this is returning here. So just by looking at the structure, you'd kind of expect like, oh, you'd have the H1, and then you'd have this div render, and that would be it. But you can see that it renders like this. You have the Hello World, and then, oh, there's nothing there. The div gets rendered up here in the portal. So you can see how you can take something that's in one component, put it in a portal, and then have it render somewhere outside the component. In this case, we're just rendering it right above the component. And then, yeah. What's that? Yep, I'm going on to that next. So this is portal. So it's going to be a little more simpler in Vue, but in React, you sort of have to build your portal component to behave this way. So you have React DOM gives you this function, and you kind of have to build your functionality around that. So here I'm using a component lifecycle method. So when this component mounts, I know the DOM nodes that I need to create the portal are going to be available. And I left this console log in here just for debugging, but we don't need that. And then when the component mounts, I set this element to the ID. I grab the element with the ID that you passed in as a prop. So a portal needs a destination, and I just created this, and passed down this prop called to, with the value of destination. And you can see that I'm just using that as the ID for the portal target. So here, this thing has an ID of destination. And so I pass this prop down as a string here called to, and then you access it as this.props.to, and now lets me grab that, what I want to use as a portal target. And then this is where the magic happens. To use a portal in React, you call this React DOM.createPortal method. You pass it the things you want the portal to render, and then you pass it the portal target. And in this case, it's that DOM node with an ID of destination. And this .props.children is a sort of special prop. Every component will always have whatever you pass in between the brackets as a children, and you can access those children programmatically using this .props.children. So this is basically just say whatever is passed in between the brackets here, just send it to the portal target here. And then you get this. So any questions about that React implementation? I'm going to go to the Vue one next. Oh, yeah.
In your Vue.js now, don't you need component to mount state for when you close a model or perhaps to go back to the state? Component did not need mount?
So if this is a modal and you want to close it, yeah, there's a few different ways. You'd have to clear the state somehow. So you can, if I pass in the button to like close, let's say this is a modal and I want to close it, I can do a few different things. I can either add some sort of functionality that will set this .state.element to null, in which case this portal will just return nothing, and then it'll disappear. Or I could do some sort of condition in here. So if I want this to conditionally render like nothing, I can just do like, I can just set like a flag there, and then like when you click the close button or something like that. Basically, you can control it in here by either passing nothing as a child, and then the portal won't render anything, or you can have the portal just not render anything. And those are two ways to sort of close the portal.
So React
Yep.
DOM has create portal method.
Yeah, so that's something you have to import from React DOM, and you just call it like that as a static method.
So actually, what will be the advantages? I mean, like it's too much concept here for me. I mean, to use the portal, in what situation you see the advantage?
Yeah, so this is a pretty basic example. I mean, it's not super obvious why this would be useful. But if we, let me see if I can modify this. So if hello world, so like if hello world had overflow like hidden, and you want to render something above it, then I don't know if I can make this work into something useful, but I mean, this has overflow hidden. You can see you can still render stuff above it. So it's kind of like, going back to my slides, I mean, the use cases will be for a modal. So if you want the modal to just, whatever you want to appear outside of the component and be above something else, that's when it's useful. But this is just a very simple example.
Well, what if you did something like
yeah.
prompt the user for a user ID and then display his name or something like that? You will look up to find the name of the customer or whatever it is.
Okay, for like having that show up having that show in a pop-up, or
Show someone that. I'm kind of a little bit confused here too as to what the point of all this is.
so it would be Yeah, would have been good to have like a solid example.
Do you want an example for us?
Yeah, I have an example in
If you
an
bring
app
back,
as well, but
if you bring back the slides, maybe we'll conceptualize easier.
it's like this is what you can use it for.
That means you
but-
can create models and pop-ups and dialogue, like kind of generic, yeah? You can customize them inside the portal, yeah?
Yeah. So it's really, I think the biggest use case for portals is modals, because the modal needs to be above everything else, and it's difficult to get a modal to be accessible and behave the way you want it if it's not at the very top of the DOM. And one of the best ways to have that set up is with a portal. So if you render a modal, like if you render your modal down here, you can give it a position of absolute, and you can set it so it looks like it's visually above everything else. But you might run into problems if, for example, your component here has overflow hidden, or you have something else that's positioned absolutely on the page that might cover up the modal, or you want to do something more complex with your modal, like you want to create a backdrop and you want to adjust the scrolling. It's a lot easier to just have that modal render at the very top than having to deal with sort of any edge cases that might occur when you render your modal over here inside this component, which could be nested really deep. Yep.
What about the example of validating a form, an
Yep.
input form? So you're filling in name, address, phone number, that kind of jazz, and they've put the phone number in wrong, left out the area code or too many digits or something.
Yep.
Could you have your modal display the error messages?
Yeah, so
You know, something like that?
yeah, that's actually a very good point. So with a portal, it's still part of the same component. So even though it's rendering up here at the top, it's still, in terms of from the point of view of React or Vue, the portal is still inside the component. So even though it's rendering anywhere else, you can interact with it in your component like it was any regular element. So you can set any properties, retrieve any properties you want from it, pass any props to it, listen to whatever events you want, and it'll behave from the application perspective as if it was a direct child, but it will actually, in the DOM, be above everything else. So it lets you, it's just a visual thing, mostly lets you put it to the top of the DOM or anywhere else you want, while still letting you interact with it like if it was a regular child component.
So they're still going to see my whole form, or the error message is going to kind of overlay the form?
You would still see your whole form, and you can interact with it inside your component like if it was rendered right there. It's just going to be at the top of the DOM, and that shouldn't break anything in your component.
You have,
So
it,
any-
you have it covered if you saw the slide. You have pop-ups. Yeah, so this
Yep.
model pop-up. So that's a pop-up case, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
what he was saying about the error codes popping up, yeah, that's a use case of, the pop-up.
Yeah, that's a good one too. If you need any sort of thing to appear at the bottom, anywhere else, above all the other stuff.
What about
Yeah.
all the search engines? Like sometimes it's useful to have something here at the DOM that you want additionally to render. So you want it to be hidden from a regular person, but you want it to be visible by a robot. So you can have this appear in a div that is off the screen, but when the person uses it, it's in the right spot or where you
Yeah, that's a good one too, for positioning things way off screen and not having them inside your component. And yeah, and also if you need something rendered off this, if you have, if you use a certain DOM structure and you want things inside of your component not to render inside of your component, you can use a portal. And so it's useful for like lists, if you want to add certain things to the list but have them appear above the list. And it'll make it easier for styling. Basically, you don't have to deal with the DOM of your component getting cluttered by things that don't actually visually appear inside the component. You can use a portal to render it somewhere else.
Quick
Yeah.
question. Can you also use the portal for different components? Or do does each component have its own portal?
You can, so this will be, it's really easy to set that up in Vue. You'll need to do a little bit more in React to set that up. But yeah, it's possible. You can have multiple portal targets and one portal source. So whatever you put in the portal source could appear in a bunch of different places. It's not necessarily like a one-to-one setup where you have one like portal source and one portal target. You can have multiple sources and one target where everything in all the portal sources appear in that one target. Or you can have one source and a bunch of targets everywhere else, and then whatever's in that one source will appear in every single target.
Are you familiar with web components?
Yeah.
So how the web components approach this problem? Is it the same or?
It would probably be the same. You'd have to. Yeah, I'm not sure how it would work in React components because they have a shadow DOM and they're self-contained, so you'd have to, yeah, just write some functionality to explicitly remove it and then place it wherever you want.
That's a general question.
Yeah, so Vue is very similar to web components. And I can jump over to the Vue example quick right now. So this is something else. Here we go. So here we have the exact same example, but in Vue. And you can see Vue, in Vue, Vue, there's a portal Vue component that you can pull in, so you don't have to set it up sort of manually like I did in React. Yep.
Is that like an official Vue supported?
I'm not sure if it's official. It's not. I don't think it's part of the Vue core. It's something you have to pull in separately and use, but it's, I think, one of the only portal implementations in Vue. It's unofficially official. But yeah, if you're using portals in Vue, this is what you would probably use. And the setup is very similar to how it's set up in React. Once again, I have my portal target. This component I didn't make. It's provided to me by this Vue portal, or this portal Vue package. So I can just drop a portal target component right there. I give it a name of destination. And this class I just use for styling. It's not related to the functionality. So I give a name of destination. And you can remember from React, I set it up manually as a div, and I just gave it an ID that I explicitly reference using a query selector. But here I just give it a name, and then in our hello world, I reference, I set up my portal like this. I tell it where I want it to render. I pass it this to prop, and I give it the name that I put here, which is destination. And this will render up here, and it's basically exactly like how it's set up in React, except for Vue, you have the sort of the components already built for you in this library that you can just pull in. And if I run this app, oops. If I run this app, it's going to look exactly the same, but now it's in Vue. So, oh, I keep being lost.
Looking at this code, I just noticed, maybe I should have asked before, at the React version, can you pass only one property? Because I see you have two, portal two destination. Can you put more than one property when you invoke the portal?
Yeah, so properties, so in the Vue app, I set it up sort of manually. So here I only set up to accept one property, which is just the ID of where you want to render. And so this is just a very basic example in React. You can add whatever you want to it. In the Vue one though, yeah, portals just accept, for every single portal, you'd have basically your one property called to, which is where you want the portal content to render. And then you have your portal targets, which just have a name. The only global HTML properties, and then you can set a property called multiple, I think, something like that. That'll let you basically define multiple. That'll let you have this portal target render content for multiple portals. So I think it's something like multiple or something like that. But yeah, the two basic properties are to, where you want to render, and then the name, so you can select the render target for the portal. Yep.
From a debugging perspective, if you inspect the DOM of the page, is it going to be obvious that drawbell was used?
No, it'll look like it just appeared at the top.
So what's the debugging procedure here? I'm looking at this, I know what's going on, what's my first step?
So yeah, if you look at the DOM, it's not, I guess, super easy to debug. You won't be able to see that as a portal. So in this Vue app, well, the way you'd be able to tell is that it's maybe as a class or something that gives a hint as to what it is, but it looks like this was just placed above everything else. And it makes it harder to debug if you look at the DOM, but that's also one of the pros of using portals is it just puts it above everything else, so it looks like it was just placed there. If you use something like, if you look at the component tree though, you'll see that the portal target is there, and you have your portal here. And it'll be easier to see that the portal is being used. But from the perspective of the DOM, it's just regular DOM nodes, nothing sort of portal special that will let you instantly identify it as a portal.
So with the portals in React, it would be quite easy to escape your app root, right? And if you want that, like a non-single page app, and you're using it within, you want to get a better role outside that, right? Can you not do that with portal Vue then? Because
that's a good point. I'm not sure, since it uses the Vue components, and you'd have to.
Like it's not just targeting a DOM element, it's still targeting a Vue component.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So yeah, in React you can set, the way I set up in React is you can set the portal target to anything. It could be outside of this root. Actually, let me open up the HTML. Yeah, so right now your entire React app is here, and it's pretty easy to set up like a target here for the portal outside of your React root. But I'm not sure how easy that would be in Vue, since it's using Vue components. So if you render a Vue app somewhere, you'd have to have the Vue target. I have too many things open. So in Vue, yeah, you'd have to have this. If you place this outside of the Vue root element, Vue's not going to know about it, and it's not going to render anything, so it wouldn't work outside the Vue root. And I'm not sure how you can set it up so it would work outside the root Vue component, but that's a good point. That's definitely something to consider if you want to render something outside of React or Vue somewhere else on the page.
That's just that package kind of gives you a lot of that, and you could probably write it in a really similar way that you did in React and Vue by targeting an element that is related to the element.
Yeah, you could probably set it up, but then there's also a few things to consider. With React, the create portal, the React DOM create portal, that'll handle things like having events bubble up. So there's a few edge cases you have to consider if you were to build it manually in Vue. You could probably look at the Vue portals source code and see how they're doing it, and sort of modify it to work outside of the Vue root element.
How you organize the code for a big application?
There's no there's no like really well accepted standard, but generally you just expand upon this sort of structure. You have components, and I'll try to keep it as flat as I can, as long as it's not too many components. But once you started getting into bigger components, you might break it up into feature folders, or if you use something like I forget the name, but like you can organize it into pages. So each page might have a big list of components, but there's no enforced standard or way to organize your components, just whatever makes sense. I always try to keep it as flat as possible. Of course, if it's a huge list, like 30 components or something, I'd group it into another folder, and so there'd be a little more nesting. It's a little more organized, but it's definitely not like an MVC approach where you break up the components. And the components are modular, so you always have most of the component or all the component data in one file, or at least in one folder together. Any other questions?
So in Vue, if you have many portals, where do you put them? In the same file in Output View?
If you have, it depends on what your requirements are and what you're trying to build. But in Vue, your portal source will always be inside a component, and then the portal target is going to be inside of component too, but you can put that anywhere else. And like I mentioned earlier, you can have as many portal sources and portal targets as you want, but there's no like container where you put them. So you're not going to have, in Vue, you can see you don't have a portal component. That's the library you bring in. But your portals will live inside your other components. There won't be a separate like portals folder or portals component.
It doesn't make it hard to debug?
I haven't found it makes it harder to debug, but I haven't built any complex portals. Generally, the things I put inside portals are like simple, like usually like a text pop-up. But yeah, if you're building something like a user form that appears in the pop-up, that would be a little harder to debug. But the debugging process is going to be the same as debugging a component. You don't have to jump anywhere else. In the code, the portal is inside the component, so you debug it just like any other component. Even though it's rendering somewhere else, you're still within your same component, so you debug it like any other component. You don't have to like have two files open. You don't have to have like the portal target open. It's all contained in one component.
Just comment on that too, that you can always, like if we're worried about looking at the DOM tree sometime in the future and being able to track where things are, you can always just kind of build your own conventions inside the children that you're passing in. Like if you want to tag it, if you wanted to annotate it with whatever the source component is actually coming from, you could do that, and then that would show up in the DOM tree under where the portal is coming through.
Yeah.
Right. So you could abuse it, but you could also keep it organized if you wanted to.
That's kind of okay.
All right, that's my presentation. Hopefully my voice is okay to listen to. I have a bit of a cough and stuff, but yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to grab me after.
Are these well documented?
Yeah, they're both pretty well documented in React. So in React, it's part of the library, so you can just type in portals and like see how to use them there. With Vue, if you go to the Vue docs and you type in portals, like you won't find it there. That's because it's not part of the core. It's a separate library. So like if you Google it, you get to the page for the Vue portals library, and it's pretty well documented as well.
Well done, Rob.